Good afternoon, all. Just got a short slot here. Just going to go through some of the overview of some of what we've been working on with the new BATC web system and how we're getting on with that, and also going to do a bit on the streamer. So I'm going to split this into two halves. The first half we're going to talk about some of the BATC web systems and the issues that we're aware of and what we're trying to do about it. I'll then take questions on that. Then after that, I'll go over the new TV streamer that we've been working on and that we've used for quite successfully for some events recently. So the current BATC online system was written by Chris and is quite comprehensive with the member management, so where you manage your subscription. We've also, of course, got the shop, which ties into that. CQTV gets distributed through a system based on that. And then we've got the streamer that hooks into it, obviously. And then there's all the tie-ins where you can manage the parameters of your stream. And it all works reasonably well. There's also some services on the side. We've obviously got the forum, and that's completely off to the side in that you have separate credentials, as I'm sure quite a few of you know, for the forum. And there was also a wiki on there as well, which had separate credentials again. So you had to track 3 logins. The hardware that all this is hosted on, so both batc.tv and batc.org.uk, is on a rack mount standard server unit that's owned by BATC and is hosted by Chris at his the place where he works, the Communication Gateway, in a proper data center there. And then in the back of it, we have 100 megabits network connection, and that's going to become relevant a bit later on. So a couple of the things that we haven't been quite comfortable with. Chris, he still logs in and manages the security patches for the operating system and will fix anything major that goes wrong. But he's not got quite so much time as he used to, which means that we're not seeing any new features. And also there's no proactive work going on in making sure that there's no security issues with the system. In addition to that, there's still a few bugs around, like if any of you have tried using the forgotten password functionality, it doesn't work, and you have to email a committee member to reset it. The other thing is this streamer with all the on a general evening, we run about 40 megabits per second of streams through the streamer. That's the traffic of people uploading and, of course, again, of the streams going out to everyone. And we've only got 100 megabits pipe in the back. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a stream that was done by one of the American guys where he did, I think it was 2 megabits video in, and then more than 50 people tried to watch it. And of course, that adds up to more than 100 megabits. And it just all stopped working. Everyone's video was buffering the whole time, and it was a hardware limitation that we couldn't really do anything about apart from ask him to reduce the stream data rate. The other thing is we've been looking around for, in case we needed to move the hosting somewhere else, the commercial pricing for racking the server unit that BATC owns and for getting the bandwidth that we use. So because we have constant video going through it, we accumulate many hundreds of gigabytes a month in total usage. And a lot of the cheaper plans will cap you on that, because if you're only running a website on it, obviously there isn't quite so much total traffic. But for our application, it ends up being really quite expensive. In addition to that, of course, if the hardware dies at any point, there would be an outage where we'd have to go up, sort it out, and we'd also have to pay for replacement parts, which isn't ideal. So the committee and I and quite a few others have done quite a bit of thinking about this, and this is the plan that we've come up with. So we're trying to move away from custom code stacks that then it's quite hard for someone to come into and maintain, and towards third-party software such as WordPress, Media Wiki, and there's a few others we're looking at the shop, like OpenCart, that are community maintained. They're used by lots of other people, and hopefully we can just plug them in, tailor them, configure them to our application, and then just track when they have an update, we merge the update in. The other thing we've wanted to do is conglomerate all the authentication. So currently there's several logins that you have to do, and we want to get it so there's one username and password for everything. And also try and have some good practices around that. Like if you've done the forgotten password thing, you get emailed to your username and password in plain text, which we'd like to avoid. Obviously, the plain text should not be stored. So we've been looking at LDAP, and specifically OpenLDAP for that, which is a directory access server, but does secure authentication. So it will store a hashed version of the password. And part of what we want to do with this is if anyone wants to write an extra service, like for example, DXBot could be hooked in, all it's got to do is be able to talk the LDAP protocol to the main database, and then it can take the logins through the same login. It can check against central LDAP to see if it's correct, and if it's correct, it gets logged in. So we can just tie more services on, and it's a standard for doing that that's well supported also among the third-party software. All the third-party software we've been looking at supports LDAP authentication. In addition, with the supporting other services, we're also using lightweight virtual machines to put every service, to isolate every service on the machine for security, so that if one of them does get, if someone writes their own project site on it and it gets compromised, we don't want it to compromise the whole server. So that would lock everything down, and also means that we can snapshot these virtual machines and hopefully just make it take less time to maintain everything. Wouldn't have to rebuild everything from scratch if we screwed up. And if we need to move to another machine somewhere, we can just download the snapshot of the machine, boot it up on another machine, and go. The other thing is we've been looking at moving to a virtual machine. So Linode is a service provider that I've used quite a bit personally and at work, where you get given a server of a given size, and it's a virtual server on a large bit of hardware, but you don't have to worry about the hardware. So for an example, we had an incident at work where we got an email from Linode saying, it looks like the RAID controller in the hardware is about to fail. We're going to give you 2 days to move your virtual machine to another box, and then we're going to take that box down. And so we had 2 days to choose when we had the downtime. It took 20 minutes to move quite a large server to another machine and boot it back up again. And that's the kind of thing that, for us volunteering for this, obviously we want to try and minimize the amount of time we spend fixing things. And that will just help us with that. The other thing is we get a 1 gigabit, the plan we're looking at with it, we get a 1 gigabit outbound network interface, so a lot more streaming capacity, 10 times the amount. And we could go more, I'll talk about that later. Large data transfer, so 8 terabytes a month, which is easily enough for all the video streaming. And the virtual machines means that we can add new machines, or we can scale the machine we're using up in a matter of minutes, with minutes of downtime, and all done remotely from our own laptop at home. So these are great plans, but what have we done so far? So Noel and Frank have put together a front-end website on WordPress to give us a sort of fresh face and an easier way for people to work out what the BATC is about. Stream server is where I've spent most of my time due to the events earlier this year, which I'll talk about a bit later. But that's minus the user integration, so we haven't got any of the user login working with that yet. This, however, is all running on a Linode VM in the containers, and I'm happy with how that works. And we've also got the EATF, the European Amateur Television Forum website, is up and running in its own little isolated container on there, and they're very happy with that. The LDAP user database, I'm still in the process of building it. It functionally works, but the whole user management pages and getting those to work provide equivalent functionality to what we've got already. I'm still ironing out a few of the differences with that, but we hope to have that really soon. So what I'm looking to do from now with that is once I get that LDAP stuff up, first I'm going to hook the stream room because I know the rest of that works. Then then we can use that as a sort of beta test, both of the streamer and of the user database. So in doing that, I'll be moving the user data across, but that obviously the passwords won't get moved across. So there'll effectively be an automated password reset email where you then log in to set the new password, and that will be your password for all the new stuff. And will be stored on the new secure system, etc. That'll act as a beta test, an opt-in beta test of the streamer and the authentication, so we can iron out a few of the issues before then moving in stuff like the forum and the wiki. Now, when I do this, the old streamer will continue to run until everyone's happy with how the new one works. Integrate the forum and the wiki, and then we've also got the shop, which is, we're taking a bit of time to think about that because it's a bit more critical to get it handled correctly. And we're looking at what we can do best to support selling products through the BATC. So that was, how are we doing on time? I've got time here. Keep going. Right, yes, 11 minutes. Okay. So the new streamer, this is the old streamer. So it's based on Adobe Flash Media Server, use RTMP input and output, which is Adobe's real-time protocol. And as such, it therefore has no HTML5 support for mobile viewing. So obviously doesn't work on iPhones or Android phones or stuff like that. The other thing you may have come across is if you try to do different aspect ratios through the browser player, it cuts it off. And unfortunately, the player is quite simple, and we haven't been able to fix that. One thing, though, is that because the streamer just passes on the video codec, it can support any codec. So I know a lot of people stream in VP6, which is something I'll talk about a bit later. But it can support anything that the Flash player can decode, and that's going to be the main difference from the HTML5 that I'll talk about in the new streamer. So this was put together very quickly for ARIS at the start of the year when we realized we wanted the BATC to be at the front of streaming the ARIS events. And for that, we needed a stream that people were impressed by, so it needed to work on iPads and phones. We decided it could do with looking a bit newer and less outdated than the old one. But it also needed to be able to scale to the demand. Now, we had no idea what the demand was. And then about a day before the first ARIS event, someone mentioned to me that the BBC were thinking about putting a link to our stream in their article about the Tim Peake events, at which point I started shaking rather a lot. But using HTML, so the way HTML5 works is it actually posts video fragments that the browser then goes through and downloads when it wants to. So the disadvantage with this is that you get a bit of a delay because nothing's real time. However, it does mean that, number one, it works on mobiles, and number two, as long as you can put another server in front that can serve those fragments within a second or two, then you can scale the bandwidth up. So the software that I'm using for this is Nginx RTMP server, which does the RTMP and also remuxes into these video fragments for the HTML5, and Clapper Media Player, which runs in the browser and is what some of you will be watching this on. At the moment, this just uses HTML5. Now, I'm aware that for stuff like repeater streams, the delay isn't ideal. Now, internally, it uses RTMP before it goes to the HLS muxer. So there will be an option to have an RTMP player, a Flash player, viewing it. I just need to find one that works well with streams that cut out a lot, because obviously people turn their streams on and off, and a lot of browser players that I've found will just throw a fatal error every time the stream disappears. So getting one where I can handle that correctly and make it work in that way like the current one does, but also get it to manage aspect ratio and resizing properly. The way that I've set this up is to have 3 categories for members, repeaters, and events. The only functional difference with this is that events, like the one that one's being streamed through, there's a transcoding for a lower quality. So we're streaming at just over a megabit video here, video and audio here. And there's FFmpeg running that automatically transcodes that down to about 200 kilobit for people watching on their phones on 3G to give a more manageable stream. But that'll only be coming on automatically for events because we haven't got the CPU to run that for everyone. Just a quick thing about how this performed in ARIS. So we were using Flash Media Live Encoder, same as we're doing here, running those parameters there. The Flash Media Live Encoder only supports MP3 encoding when using H.264. And as I've got on slide in a bit, the HTML5, if you want it to work in all browsers, you can only do H.264 and AAC. So that gets transcoded server-side, but that's pretty much transparent. You won't notice any difference. And for the, as it was running as an event, we had the lower bandwidth 200 kilobit transcode running as well. Now, when I got rather worried about how this was going to work with potentially a rather large number of users, I very quickly went onto the Linode site and hired some big boxes in London and Frankfurt. So those are their two main European data centers at the moment. I was able to set these up in about 20 minutes, and they cost, as I put on there, $1 an hour. I ran both of them for 4 hours, $8 total, and that could theoretically handle about 12,000 users. I just didn't want to have to worry about it, basically. In the end, for that one, we got a peak of 1,600, so we pushed just over 1,400 megabits of traffic from the video servers in total, which obviously we wouldn't have been able to do with the old server. But everyone was very pleased with how it works. So that performed well. The other reason I went so high on the resources here was because I wasn't sure it was going to scale linearly. And I had no idea of running these kind of video, this scale of stuff before. I had no idea if there was another bottleneck somewhere. So I wanted to find out if there was, and it turned out there wasn't. The CPU usage on these was 1 or 2%, and it was literally just pushing network traffic out. And lastly, I've just got a slide about the codecs because, so if you're going to use the HTML5 mobile compatible stream on the new streamer, there are certain other codecs that work in certain browsers. But if you want to cover all browsers, so cover people using IE, Safari, Firefox, and Chrome, you need to use H.264 and AAC. And specifically, you then need to only use main profile and maximum of level 3.1, which are the parameters in the H.264 encoder. There are a lot of places that advertise using baseline profile, which because I believe I have noted down here that before the iPhone, some of the earlier iPhones didn't support main profile, but now everything since the iPhone 4 or later supports those parameters. And that gives you a good amount of efficiency in the encoding while giving you support so those parameters give you support for any iPad, iPhone 4 or later, and nearly all Android 4 devices or above, while still giving you a good amount of efficiency on that. Because Flash Media Live Encoder, for ways I can't work out, can support AAC with other codecs, but won't support it when you're running H.264, there is a transcode on the new streamer for every stream that's running MP3 upload. And that's very low CPU, so we anticipate it will be totally fine to run for everyone. We may have it opt-in so it only happens when you enable the HTML5 output, so the RTMP will continue to run as before. One thing I have heard is a lot of people using VP6 because it works better for the noisy pictures you get off analog video streams. And the reason for this is because they put a denoising filter in the front that cuts out all the high-frequency detail before it goes to the encoder. And actually, if you have better control over your encoder, you can tell FFmpeg to use one of these, and it works just as well, if not better. Because once you've got the noise out the way, H.264 is vastly superior to VP6 in actual efficiency per bandwidth. Now, vMix actually uses FFmpeg in the background, so you can go in and tune this if you get the right parameters. And the filter you're looking for is HQDN3D, which if you Google that, has a few examples on it. However, if that isn't an option, and actually for the repeater streaming, you may just want RTMP streaming anyway, because you want it real time. The HTML5 we found tends to have about a 5 to 15 second delay. The delay is entirely dependent on what the client chooses. I've tended to find that desktop browsers will go for about a 15-second delay, whereas I've only got 5 seconds viewing it on my phone, which seems rather illogical, but just seems to be the way it works, where it decides to start playing the video, basically. And running at just over 20 minutes. That's quite a fast run through, but does anyone have any questions from anything they've managed to pick up?